Hello everyone, my name is Joshua from Apologetics, and in this video we are continuing our analysis of the logical statements and sequences found in the Quran and in the Bible. The last video on this, part 1, focused mainly on the Quran, but this one will focus mainly on the Bible. The Bible translation that I am using is the Revised Standard Version, Second Catholic Edition. Matthew 22, verse 15 to 22, which reads, Then the Pharisees went and took counsel how to entangle him, Jesus, in his speech. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true, and teach the way of God truthfully, and care for no man, for you do not regard the position of men. Tell us then, what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the money for the tax. And they brought him a coin, and Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. Here, the Pharisees, which are basically the bad guys in the Gospels, tried to trap Jesus in his words. They sent messengers to ask Jesus if they should pay the taxes to Caesar. If Jesus said yes, then Jesus would appear to be betraying the Jewish people for their Roman oppressors. But if he said no, the Pharisees would have evidence to charge Jesus with inciting a revolt against the Roman authority. Here again, Jesus refuses these false dichotomies and says his very popular line, Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Not only does it recognize that civil leaders have their authority from God, but also that God has supremacy over all human authorities. At Jesus' genius response, his interlocutors were amazed. Matthew 19, verse 3 to verse 9 reads, And Pharisees came up to him, Jesus, and tested him by asking, Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? He answered, Have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they are no longer two but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder. They said to him, Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? He said to them, For your hardness of heart Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Here, the Pharisees, a first-century sect of Judaism, tried to test Jesus by asking him if divorce is ever permissible. The background of this is Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 through 4, which is a moral concession made to Israel that allowed divorce. At this time in history, there were two dominant views on when divorce was allowed. The school of Shammai held a stricter requirement for divorce, saying it is only acceptable in response to serious sexual offenses, like adultery, whereas the school of Hillel held a more lenient requirement, saying that divorce was allowed for any reason that displeased the husband. The Pharisees are trying to box Jesus into one of these views, but Jesus does not let himself be put into these categories. Instead of offering an interpretation of Moses' allowance of divorce, he abolishes it completely. He says that divorce was not part of God's original plan for husband and wife, and that he has come to restore marriage to the way it should be, an indissoluble union of love. This shows the genius of Christ. He is not here to continue the broken way of the past. He is here to bring about a new era, the Messianic era. Deuteronomy 10, verse 12 to verse 22 reads, And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with our heart and with our soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I command you this day for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart and love upon your fathers, and chose the descendants after them, you above all peoples, as at this day. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no longer stubborn. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the terrible God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and cling to him, and by his name you shall swear. He is your praise, he is your God, who has done for you these great and terrible things which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt, 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of heaven for multitude. For context, Deuteronomy is Moses' memoir, his last testament. Firstly, Moses lays out the essence of the law, the basis of what Israel is commanded to do, to fear, love, and serve God with their whole being, and to keep the commandments laid out by Moses. Moses then explains why Israel should even bother following the Mosaic law and God's commands. He describes how God is God of the universe, the sovereign over all, yet he chose Israel as his people. This is to make the Israelites think, if the all-powerful God chose this tiny old people, we should be in such holy fear of God and reverence as to follow all he tells us. Using the analogy of circumcision, Moses tells Israel to circumcise their hearts and stop being stubborn. This stubbornness of heart plagued Israel throughout their wandering in the desert and after they entered the promised land. Without even going into the analogy of circumcision and baptism, this contains so much depth. Even after all that God has done for the Israelites, they still choose to worship false gods and idols, as in Exodus chapter 32. Next, Moses describes how God is infinitely great and is not partial, even if bribed. This statement, before it even happens, condemns the false assurance that Israel will be free from harm because they have the Jerusalem temple, a spiritual complacency that ironically leads to the downfall of the Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Next, Moses explains that God is the defender of the defenseless. This again condemns in advance the abuse of the poor and the oppressed that will run rampant in the divided kingdom era of the rest of the passage explains how Israel should act with gratitude because God has freed them from bondage. Because God has freed them from bondage, they should likewise love the sojourner. Matthew 22, verse 23 to 33 reads, The same day Sadducees came to him, Jesus, who said that there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies, having no children, his brother must marry the widow, and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married, and died, and having no children left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died, and the resurrection therefore, to which of the 7 will she be wife? For they all had her. But Jesus answered them, You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. For context, the Sadducees are another first-century sect of Judaism. They do not believe in the general resurrection of the dead at the end of time, and they only use the first 5 books in the Bible, known as the Torah. So, these Sadducees are trying to disprove the resurrection to Jesus, and they cite the Levirate law of Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 through 6, which says that if a husband dies without having any kids, the nearest male kinsman has the duty of marrying his kinsman's widow and bearing sons for this deceased kinsman. The Sadducees pose an absurd situation based on this to try to disprove the resurrection. Here again, Jesus escapes the trap. He says that there is no marriage in the resurrection, so the widow woman will be wife to no one in the resurrection. Further, Jesus quotes from the few Old Testament books the Sadducees accept to prove the general resurrection of the dead. He quotes from the theophany of the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, where God introduces himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. How, says Jesus, can God be God of a truly dead man who doesn't even exist since he died? The only way this makes sense is if these patriarchs still live after death. Again, the crowds are amazed at the genius of Jesus. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you disagree with my analysis that the logic of the Bible is better than the logic of the Quran, please explain your reason why in the comment sections below. This is Heretic Apologetics. God love you all.